when we think about human relationships, particularly the way women interact with the world, there's an often overlooked dimension that determines both the respect they receive and the power they hold. That dimension is privacy. Now, privacy doesn't mean secrecy in the pathological sense. It doesn't mean deception or dishonesty. It means recognizing that some parts of who you are must remain yours and yours alone. There is a sacredness to the inner world, and when you give it away too freely, you diminish its value. It's a psychological principle as much as it is a cultural one. That which is rare is respected, and that which is overexposed is devalued. One of the most dangerous traps people fall into today, and it's particularly amplified by social media, is the compulsion to reveal everything. To share every thought, every feeling, every detail of one's personal life as if the entire world is entitled to an explanation. But think about that. If everyone has access to the most intimate details of your life, then what's left for you? What's left for those who've actually earned the right to know you? The answer is nothing. Overexposure erodes intimacy, it erodes trust, and it ultimately erodes the power of your presence. A woman who understands the value of privacy intuitively knows that mystery is not a weakness. It's a form of influence. It creates gravity. It draws people in rather than pushing them away. People respect what they don't fully understand because it forces them to pay attention, to observe, to wonder. And that act of wondering elevates your value in their eyes. If, by contrast, you make everything about yourself visible, your insecurities, your vulnerabilities, your daily conflicts, you remove the very space that generates respect. There is no intrigue in total exposure, only familiarity, and familiarity breeds contempt. You can see this in relationships. Think of the difference between someone who carries themselves with discretion, who chooses carefully what to reveal and to whom, versus someone who blurts out everything indiscriminately. The former commands respect. Others lean in, curious, thoughtful, careful in how they approach. The latter often finds their words dismissed, their struggles trivialized, because nothing they share feels rare or significant. The principle here is simple: scarcity enhances value, and privacy is the mechanism through which scarcity is preserved. Now, privacy doesn't mean shutting yourself off from others. It doesn't mean coldness or lack of connection. What it means is discernment. It means drawing a boundary between the parts of yourself that are appropriate for public display and the parts that are sacred, reserved for only the most trustworthy individuals. This is why I often say you need to be extremely careful with your friends with whom you allow into your inner circle, because those people will shape how you see yourself and how the world sees you. If you hand over your inner life indiscriminately, you allow others to write over your narrative, to diminish your uniqueness, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes deliberately. Mystery, in this sense, is protective. It's not about manipulation. It's about safeguarding your soul from being trampled upon. The world is not always benevolent. Many people consciously or unconsciously will exploit what they know about you for their own advantage. If you reveal your weaknesses, they may press on them. If you reveal your ambitions, they may undermine them. If you reveal your private sorrows, they may spread them. A woman who reveals too much leaves herself defenseless. But a woman who understands the necessity of privacy ensures that the core of who she is cannot be touched by the chaos outside. This principle of privacy and mystery also has deep psychological consequences. When you maintain private aspects of yourself, you preserve your own sense of individuality. You don't allow the outside world to define everything you are. Too many people, especially in our hyper-connected age, fall into the trap of shaping their identities entirely around external validation. How many likes they receive, how many people comment, how others perceive their struggles or triumphs. And when you do that, you are no longer truly living as yourself. You are living as a projection of what you think others want to see. That's not freedom. That's slavery to the opinions of others. But privacy is liberation. It allows you to exist without constantly performing. It allows you to cultivate inner strength, to build thoughts, ideas, and dreams in silence before exposing them to the harsh critique of the outside world. And there's enormous power in that. Think of an artist who works on a masterpiece in secret, who doesn't rush to display their work in its fragile, incomplete form. By the time it is revealed, it has matured, solidified, and no amount of critique can dismantle it. That's the same way a woman should approach her inner life. She must protect it, refine it, allow it to gain strength behind closed doors. Only then does it become unshakable. And let's not forget the social dimension. People, whether consciously or not, test each other. They want to know where your boundaries are. If you have no boundaries, if everything is available for public consumption, they learn that you can be taken advantage of. But if you are selective, if you demonstrate through your discretion that not everything is up for grabs, people begin to respect you. They begin to tread more carefully around you. That respect is earned not by revealing everything, but by refusing to reveal everything. Mystery is also profoundly tied to dignity. Dignity arises when you carry yourself with a sense of worth, when you communicate through your behavior that you understand your own value. And one of the clearest signals of dignity is privacy. It's the quiet message that says, "You do not have full access to me. You will not know everything about me just because you demand it. Only those who prove worthy, who demonstrate care, loyalty, and trustworthiness will see more of who I am." That kind of stance commands attention. It creates a hierarchy of intimacy, and only those who truly value you will climb it. If you look at history, you'll notice that the most respected figures, whether queens, leaders, thinkers, or cultural icons, always maintained an aura of mystery, not because they were deliberately elusive, but because they understood the psychology of value. They gave the world enough to inspire, enough to guide, but they never gave away everything. And that partial concealment is what preserved their influence across time. So when we say a woman should guard her privacy and preserve her mystery, we're not advocating weakness. We're not suggesting retreat or disengagement. Quite the opposite. We're calling for strength, for wisdom, for strategy. Because life is a game of negotiation. It's a game of power. And if you expose too much, you hand your power over to others. But if you protect the essential parts of yourself, you remain grounded, unshakable, respected. In the end, privacy is not about hiding. It's about valuing. It's about saying, "I am not common. I am not disposable. I am not available to everyone at all times." And when you send that message through discretion, through silence, through selective revelation, you elevate yourself. You become someone others approach with reverence instead of carelessness. You transform yourself from an open book that anyone can scribble into a rare manuscript, preserved, protected, and worthy of respect. That is the true value of privacy. That is the power of mystery. Human beings are emotional creatures. That's undeniable. Emotions are not arbitrary. They are ancient signals deeply rooted in our biology, pointing us toward what matters most. They guide us toward survival, connection, and meaning. But here's the paradox: the very thing that gives us depth, passion, and authenticity can also enslave us if we fail to regulate it. And for women especially, the capacity to manage and direct emotion with intelligence is one of the most powerful tools they can possess. Without control, emotions become weapons turned against you. With control, emotions become instruments of influence, sources of inner strength, and shields against exploitation. Consider what happens when emotions are allowed to spill unchecked into the public domain. When every feeling, anger, sadness, fear, insecurity, is expressed impulsively, the world learns two things about you. First, it learns your vulnerabilities. It learns where you can be manipulated. If someone knows that a single word of criticism will make you collapse into self-doubt, you've essentially given them the map to your destruction. Second, the world learns not to take your emotions seriously. When every outburst is immediate and unrestrained, the gravity of your feelings diminishes. It's like crying wolf. Constant expression without discipline erodes the significance of the message. Emotional control, therefore, is not about suppression. It's about timing. It's about choosing when and how to reveal what you feel so that it has the maximum effect and so that it serves your well-being instead of sabotaging it. There's a difference between honesty and exposure. Honesty is saying what is true, but exposure is surrendering every raw impulse without consideration. Too many people confuse the two. They think that to be authentic is to be constantly emotional, to let others see every wound and every fluctuation. But that's not authenticity, it's recklessness. Authenticity requires discernment, the ability to show your real self in ways that align with your values, not in ways that cheapen or weaken you. For a woman, especially in a world that still too often seeks to exploit vulnerability, the ability to temper emotions is a form of self-defense. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. Emotional control does not strip away humanity. Quite the opposite, it enhances it. Because emotions in their raw, unrefined state can be chaotic. Anger unbridled becomes destructive rage. Sadness unchecked becomes paralyzing despair. Desire without restraint becomes obsession. But when those emotions are refined, when they're held, shaped, and expressed with intentionality, they transform into virtues. Anger becomes righteous conviction, sadness becomes empathy, desire becomes ambition, and that transformation only happens through control. Imagine a woman in a heated argument. If she erupts in uncontrolled anger, shouting, lashing out, losing her composure, she may temporarily relieve tension, but she undermines her credibility. She confirms the stereotype of being overly emotional or unstable. But if she feels the same anger, breathes, holds it, channels it, and delivers her words with precision, firm, calm, unshakable, that same emotion now becomes a weapon of respect. People stop. They listen. They feel the weight of her presence. The difference is not the emotion itself. It's the mastery over it. This mastery extends into intimate relationships as well. Love, attachment, jealousy, insecurity. All these emotions run deep. If they're expressed without reflection, they corrode relationships. Jealousy, for instance, when shown in constant suspicion and accusation, suffocates intimacy. But when recognized and controlled, jealousy becomes a signal that you value the bond, that you're attentive to its fragility. The difference is in how you choose to handle the spark before it becomes wildfire. Emotional control creates space for understanding rather than destruction. And then there's the broader social arena. The workplace, friendships, communities, these are not places where unchecked emotion thrives. In fact, in professional environments, emotional control often defines the difference between success and stagnation. People who can remain composed under pressure, who don't panic when crises strike, earn leadership positions. They're trusted because they demonstrate reliability. For a woman, that composure is doubly powerful because it counters the unfair but persistent cultural expectation that women are ruled by feelings. By mastering emotions, she not only secures respect but also subverts limiting stereotypes. But let's take this deeper, beyond the practical into the philosophical. Why is emotional control so fundamental to human flourishing? Because life is suffering. As I often emphasize, you will encounter betrayal, loss, disappointment, and injustice. And when those moments arrive, if you are ruled by emotion, you will collapse. You'll despair when despair arises, rage when rage arises, and retreat when fear arises. But if you cultivate the discipline to feel without being destroyed, to carry sorrow without breaking, to face fear without fleeing, then you become resilient. And resilience is what allows life to become meaningful in spite of its inevitable tragedies. This resilience doesn't come from denying what you feel. Suppression is not the answer. Suppression builds pressure until it explodes in destructive ways. No? Resilience comes from awareness. It comes from acknowledging your emotion, naming it, understanding where it comes from, and then deciding what to do with it. That decision, that moment of choice, is where freedom lies. If you can step between stimulus and response, if you can place even a fraction of a second between what you feel and what you do, then you are no longer a slave to your biology. You are free. The psychological literature supports this. Cognitive behavioral theory emphasizes that thoughts, not emotions, ultimately shape behavior. If you feel fear but think clearly, you can act courageously. If you feel anger but reflect before speaking, you can act justly. Neuroscience confirms that the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, has the power to regulate the amygdala, the emotional center, but only if you practice. Only if you build the habit of reflection. Emotional control is not an innate gift. It is a discipline cultivated through awareness, restraint, and constant effort. For women, this discipline carries a unique significance. Historically, women were often dismissed as irrational, their emotions used as justification to exclude them from power. That cultural bias still lingers in many places. But when a woman demonstrates emotional composure, when she commands her feelings rather than being commanded by them, she not only elevates herself individually but challenges that collective bias. She redefines what strength looks like. And in doing so, she inspires others, both women and men, to respect emotion not as a weakness, but as a strength when mastered. Think of the women in history who've left an indelible mark. They weren't devoid of emotion. They felt it profoundly, but they wielded it like a sword, unsheathed only when necessary, and always with purpose. That is the model to follow, because the world doesn't respect chaos, it respects order. And order, in the emotional sense, is cultivated through control. At the core of all this lies a simple truth: emotions are powerful servants, but terrible masters. If you let them rule, they will drag you into ruin. If you rule them, they will become the very force that propels you toward greatness. A woman who learns this truth, who builds the discipline to master her emotions, doesn't just protect herself from harm, she sets herself apart as someone unshakable, someone formidable, someone who cannot be easily broken. And that, ultimately, is the essence of strength. Silence is one of the most underestimated forms of strength. People often assume that power comes from speaking, from filling the air with words, from asserting oneself loudly and constantly. But that's not true. More often than not, it's the silence between words, the refusal to respond immediately, that creates the deepest impact. Strategic silence is not the absence of power, it's the concentration of it. It signals self-control, it commands attention, and it forces others to confront themselves in the space you leave unfilled. Think about what happens in a conversation when someone expects a reaction and you don't give it to them. The silence unsettles them. It makes them question themselves. It creates a void that they must fill, and in doing so, they reveal more than they intended. That is the paradox of silence. It exposes more in others than endless speech ever could. A woman who understands how to wield silence strategically is not weak or passive. She is profoundly powerful. She knows that words, once spoken, cannot be taken back, but silence, once deployed, can speak louder than any sentence. Life is full of situations where the instinct is to respond immediately. Someone insults you, and you feel the urge to defend yourself. Someone pressures you, and you feel the urge to explain. Someone provokes you, and you want to retaliate. But here's the problems. Reaction without pause is rarely wise. It's impulsive, emotional, and usually plays into the hands of the other person. Strategic silence, however, breaks that cycle. By withholding immediate response, you regain control of the interaction. You show that you are not ruled by others' provocations. That composure communicates more authority than any counterattack could. Silence also magnifies presence. People often equate presence with charisma, with speaking persuasively. But presence is equally about restraint. A person who speaks only when necessary, whose words are measured and rare, is often listened to more attentively than someone who never stops talking. Why? Because scarcity creates value. The fewer words you use, the more weight each one carries. If you speak constantly, people tune you out. If you speak sparingly, people lean in. They recognize that your silence is not emptiness, it's intentionality. In relationships, silence is equally powerful. Consider conflict. When arguments escalate, both sides tend to speak over each other, each trying to assert dominance through volume or frequency. But if one person suddenly falls silent, not in surrender but in deliberate composure, the entire rhythm shifts. The silence communicates that escalation will not continue on their terms. It creates space for reflection, for the other person to hear themselves, often for the first time. Silence can de-escalate where words would only inflame. But silence is not only about withholding reaction, it's also about withholding disclosure. Too many people reveal far more than they should. Out of nervousness, guilt, or the need to be understood, they rush to fill silence with explanation, confession, or reassurance. But a woman who is strategically silent refuses to hand over her entire inner life simply because someone asks. She recognizes that not every question deserves an answer, not every curiosity deserves to be satisfied. By guarding her silence, she guards her autonomy. There's a psychological principle at play here too. People are uncomfortable with silence. Most individuals feel compelled to fill it, often without realizing that in doing so, they expose their weaknesses. Skilled negotiators, for instance, use silence deliberately. After making an offer, they remain quiet, forcing the other party to squirm, to speak, to reveal their bottom line. The one who breaks silence first often loses ground. The same applies in everyday life. If you can tolerate silence, if you can sit with it without desperation, you hold the advantage. Philosophically, silence carries another layer of meaning. It reflects humility. When you don't feel the need to broadcast every opinion, every feeling, every thought, you demonstrate an awareness of the limits of your knowledge. You show that you are willing to listen, to observe, to absorb. And ironically, that humility creates authority because people trust those who do not constantly demand attention. Strategic silence, therefore, is not just about withholding speech. It's about cultivating depth. It's about showing that your presence is rooted not in noise but in substance. There is also a moral dimension. Words can wound. Words can mislead. Words can escalate conflicts to the point of no return. And words, once spoken, cannot be undone. Silence prevents damage. Silence holds back the irreversible. In moments of anger, silence is wisdom. In moments of temptation, silence is discipline. In moments of uncertainty, silence is caution. It buys time, it prevents regret, and it preserves relationships that might otherwise be destroyed by impulsive speech. The strength of silence becomes especially evident in environments where women are often underestimated. Too often, there is pressure to prove oneself, to over-explain, to constantly justify existence. But silence disrupts that pattern. When a woman refuses to justify herself unnecessarily, when she answers selectively instead of compulsively, she forces others to reckon with her as an equal. Strategic silence denies others the ability to control the narrative. It creates space where power shifts. It demonstrates that respect must be earned, not demanded. Think of historical figures again. The most influential women were not those who spoke the most, but those whose words carried weight because they were rare, because they emerged from long silences of reflection. Their restraint made their voices authoritative. Their silence became part of their mystique, their dignity. And that mystique is what gave them influence beyond their immediate presence. But silence is not easy. It requires strength. It requires the ability to endure discomfort, to resist the instinct to fill voids, to remain composed in the face of provocation. That discipline doesn't emerge overnight. It is practiced, cultivated, and refined. It requires trust in yourself, that your value is not diminished by withholding words, that your presence does not depend on constant explanation. And once you cultivate that trust, silence becomes second nature. The truth is, silence reveals character. It shows whether you are ruled by insecurity or guided by strength. An insecure person cannot bear silence because it exposes their anxiety. A strong person embraces silence because it affirms their control. And when silence is embraced strategically, it transforms from emptiness into a statement: I will not be rushed. I will not be manipulated. I will not be reduced to noise. In the end, strategic silence is about agency. It's about owning the power to decide when to speak and when to withhold, when to reveal and when to conceal. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful statement is the one left unsaid, that silence itself can be a form of eloquence. A woman who learns to wield this power is not diminished by it. She is elevated. She becomes someone who is not easily provoked, not easily read, and not easily controlled. Her silence becomes her strength, her boundary, her command. And that, perhaps, is one of the most important lessons anyone can learn, that silence used with intention is not absence. It is presence, concentrated and undeniable. Not everyone deserves access to every part of who you are. That's an essential truth that many people struggle to internalize, and it's particularly important for women in a culture that often pressures them into oversharing, into explaining themselves endlessly, into offering their private lives for public consumption. But human beings, by nature, are hierarchical creatures. Some earn your trust, some don't. Some prove themselves worthy of your time and energy, many don't. If you fail to distinguish between them, if you offer the same level of intimacy and openness to everyone indiscriminately, you dilute the very meaning of intimacy. You give away the sacred for free, and in doing so, you risk betrayal, exploitation, and disappointment. Selective disclosure is the art of knowing who to share with, what to share, and when to share it. It's not deception, it's discernment. It's understanding that your inner world is not a public marketplace. It is a private sanctuary, and only those who demonstrate genuine care, loyalty, and respect should be allowed through its gates. And this is not merely a matter of self-protection, though that's part of it. It's also a matter of respect, respect for yourself and for the people who actually matter in your life. If everyone has equal access, then no one's access has meaning. Think of your deepest fears. Imagine revealing them to someone who has not earned your trust. What happens? At best, they dismiss you. At worst, they weaponize your vulnerability. Now think of your long-term aspirations, those goals that light you up inside. If you broadcast them to everyone, what response do you receive? Some will encourage you, yes, but many will discourage you out of jealousy, insecurity, or simple misunderstanding. If you reveal too much too soon, you risk suffocating the very spark that keeps your ambition alive. Dreams are fragile in their early stages, and they need protection. Selective disclosure is how you protect them. In relationships, this principle is even more critical. A woman who shares every detail of her relationship struggles with friends, family, or strangers on the internet risks eroding the very bond she's trying to preserve. Relationships thrive on trust and intimacy between the two involved, not on endless commentary from outsiders. The more you invite others into what is private, the more chaotic and unstable it becomes. Selective disclosure here means recognizing that not every fight, not every frustration, not every moment of doubt belongs outside the walls of your home. By guarding those private matters, you preserve the integrity of the relationship. And in professional settings, the same rule applies. You may feel insecure about your abilities. You may doubt whether you're ready for the promotion, whether you deserve the recognition. But blurting out those insecurities to everyone in your workplace does nothing but undermine your authority. It doesn't make you more authentic. It makes you more vulnerable to being overlooked or dismissed. That doesn't mean hiding struggles entirely, but it means choosing carefully whom to trust with those admissions. A mentor, perhaps. A superior who respects you, possibly, but colleagues or rivals who may use your words against you. Absolutely not. What's striking is how much of this comes down to timing. There are things you should never share, but there are also things you should share only at the right time with the right person and in the right context. Too early, and you lose control of the narrative. Too broadly, and you invite chaos. Too indiscriminately, and you cheapen your truth. Selective disclosure is essentially about managing timing and audience. It's the skill of aligning your words with your values, your circumstances, and your goals. Some might argue that withholding is inauthentic. They'll say, if you don't share everything, you're not being real. But that's an immature understanding of authenticity. Authenticity is not the same as exposure. You don't need to bleed publicly to be genuine. In fact, the most authentic people are often the most private because they live in alignment with themselves, not in constant performance for others. They choose what to share deliberately, not compulsively, and that deliberation is what gives their words gravity. When they do reveal something personal, it matters because it is rare and intentional. On a psychological level, selective disclosure preserves your agency. Every time you reveal something about yourself, you hand another person a piece of power. The power to shape how others see you, the power to comfort you or hurt you, the power to encourage you or undermine you. That's not a gift to hand out carelessly. Agency is about retaining control over your own narrative. If you scatter pieces of yourself in every direction, you lose that control. But if you reveal selectively, you decide who gets to shape the story of your life and how. There's another layer to this. People project their own biases, insecurities, and limitations onto whatever you share. If you tell someone about a dream, they don't hear your dream. They filter it through their own fears and failures. They tell you it's impossible because they believe it's impossible for them. If you share your heartbreak, they offer advice not based on your situation, but based on their own wounds. By limiting disclosure, you limit projection. You ensure that your life isn't constantly being rewritten through the lens of other people's inadequacies. And let's consider influence. Influence is not achieved by giving everything away freely. It's achieved by creating boundaries, by controlling access. A woman who speaks her mind constantly, without restraint, may be perceived as transparent, but not necessarily as powerful. A woman who speaks selectively, who reveals just enough to command attention while keeping much to herself, cultivates intrigue. That intrigue compels people to listen more closely, to respect more deeply, because they recognize that her words are not thrown casually, they are chosen. This principle is reflected in ancient wisdom traditions as well. The Stoics emphasize control over speech, advising that one should speak little and only when necessary. Religious texts across cultures emphasize guarding one's tongue, understanding that words shape reality and that reality is not to be handled carelessly. Selective disclosure, therefore, is not just a modern psychological strategy. It's a timeless truth about human interaction. The less you expose unnecessarily, the more you protect the sacred, the more you preserve dignity, and the more you command respect. But let's be clear, selective disclosure is not about fear. It's not about hiding from the world. It's about aligning revelation with trust. It's about saying my inner life has value, and I will not throw it to the crowd like scraps. I will give it only where it will be honored. That stance is an act of self-respect. It teaches others how to treat you. If you give everything freely, you teach people that your inner life is cheap. If you reveal selectively, you teach them that it is precious. Ultimately, the principle of selective disclosure is about balance. Too much concealment and you become isolated, disconnected, unable to form real bonds. Too much exposure and you become scattered, exploited, diminished. The balance is in revealing enough to build trust, enough to connect, enough to inspire, but never so much that you lose control of your essence. A woman who masters this balance walks through the world with quiet power. She is approachable, but not vulnerable to exploitation. She is authentic, but not overexposed. She is understood, but never entirely known. And in that space of partial revelation lies her dignity, her strength, and her influence.